Captain Jake Morrison walked into the big meeting hall. The place was huge and filled with strange creatures from different planets. These were the leaders of the Galactic Defense Council. They all looked at Jake with amused eyes, like they were watching a funny show. The hall had bright lights that hurt Jake's eyes at first. He could smell different alien scents in the air. Some smelled like metal, others like flowers, and some like things he had never smelled before. The floor was made of smooth stone that felt cold under his boots. Jake wore his best military uniform. It was dark blue with shiny buttons and medals on his chest. He had worked hard to earn those medals back on Earth, but here in this room full of powerful aliens they seemed very small and unimportant. The biggest alien in the room was called Vorthak. He looked like a giant snake but had arms and wore fancy clothes. His skin was covered in green and gold scales that moved and changed colors when light hit them. When he spoke, his voice was deep and made the floor shake a little. "So the humans want to join our elite combat division?" Vorthak said. His snake-like tongue flicked out when he talked. "This is very funny to us," other aliens in the room started, making strange sounds. Jake realized they were laughing at him. One alien looked like a big bug with many eyes. His eyes glowed red when he was happy. Another alien was made of what looked like living crystal. When she laughed, she made musical sounds like bells ringing. There was also a group of aliens that looked like they were made of fire and light. They floated in the air, and when they laughed, sparks flew from their bodies. Jake had never seen so many different types of creatures in one place. "Your people have been part of our alliance for 50 years, Vorthak continued. "But you are still very new and very weak. Look around you, human. Do you see the Krillian warriors?" Jake looked where Vorthak pointed. He saw aliens that looked like walking rocks. They were 8 feet tall and had 4 arms each. Their skin looked harder than steel, and they carried weapons that could cut through metal like paper. "Do you see the Cerebrax thinkers?" Vorthak pointed to another group. These aliens had big heads and glowing eyes. Jake felt uncomfortable when they looked at him. It was like they could read his thoughts just by staring at him. "And there are the Stellar Chosen," Vorthak said, pointing to the fire-like aliens. "They can create energy with their minds. They can destroy entire buildings without touching them." Jake stood still and quiet. He knew this would happen. Admiral Betty Collins had told him before he came here. She was waiting for him in the viewing area above. She had been the one to pick Jake for this mission. Betty had said, "Jake, they will laugh at you. They think humans are soft and weak. We trade with them and fix their machines, but they don't think we can fight. You need to prove them wrong." Jake remembered growing up on Earth. Humans had to fight for everything. They fought against wild animals, bad weather, diseases, and each other. Earth was not an easy planet to live on, but maybe that was exactly what made humans strong in ways these aliens did not understand. "We know humans are not strong like Krillians," Vorthak said. "You cannot read minds like Cerebrax. You cannot control energy like Stellar Chosen. You cannot even live as long as most of us. So tell me, weak human, why should we waste our time training you?" The room got very quiet. All the aliens stared at Jake. Some looked curious, others looked bored. A few still looked like they thought this was all very funny. Jake took a deep breath. "Because you don't know what humans can really do," he said. His voice was calm but firm. "You have never seen us when we are pushed to our limits." This made the aliens laugh even more. The bug-like alien clicked his claws together. The crystal alien made sounds like breaking glass. Even some of the serious aliens smiled. "Very brave words from such a small creature," said another alien. "This one looked like a walking tree with many branches for arms. But words are easy. Fighting is hard." Vorthak raised one of his hands to make the room quiet. "Very well, human. We will give you what you ask for. Commander Zextar will train you." Jake looked at the alien Vorthak pointed to. Zextar was one of the bug-like creatures, but bigger than the others. He had sharp claws on all his hands and his eyes glowed brighter. When he looked at Jake, it felt like being stared at by a predator. "I will enjoy this," Zextar said. His voice sounded like metal scraping against stone. "It has been a long time since I had such an easy student to break." When you fail, Vorthak continued, and you will fail, maybe your people will understand where they belong in our galaxy. You are traders and builders, not warriors. The alien started laughing again as Jake saluted and turned to leave. He walked out of the hall with his back straight and his head high. But inside, he was already planning. These aliens thought they knew humans, but they were wrong. What they did not know was that Jake Morrison was not just any human. He had been chosen very carefully. On Earth, he was known for one thing above all others. He never gave up. No matter how hard things got, no matter how much pain he felt, Jake Morrison always kept fighting. The aliens were about to learn something new about humans. They were about to learn that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is push a human too far. As Jake left the building, he looked up at the alien sky. Soon, he would start training. Soon, he would show these creatures what a human could really become. Jake arrived at the training facility on planet Nexus Prime. The place looked like a nightmare made real. The building was massive, made of black metal that seemed to absorb light. Strange symbols were carved into the walls, and the air smelled like burning metal and ozone. Commander Zextar was waiting for him at the entrance. Up close, the alien was even more scary than Jake remembered. Zextar was 8 feet tall with 6 arms and a body covered in hard, black shell. His claws were as long as kitchen knives and looked just as sharp. His compound eyes had hundreds of small parts that all moved independently, watching Jake from every angle. "Welcome to your doom, human," Zextar said. His voice sounded like rocks grinding together. "This is where weak creatures come to die." Jake followed Zextar into the facility. The hallways were wide and tall, built for aliens much bigger than humans. The walls were covered with weapons from different planets. Some looked like swords, others like guns, and many looked like things Jake had never seen before. They entered a large room where 3 other trainees were waiting. These would be Jake's training partners for the next few months. Jake looked at them and felt his heart sink. They were all much bigger and stronger than any human could ever be. The first one was named Korath. He was a Krillian warrior, one of the rock-like aliens Jake had seen at the council meeting. Korath was 9 feet tall and looked like he was made of living granite. His skin was gray and rough, and small crystals grew out of his shoulders and arms. He had 4 arms, each one thicker than Jake's whole body. When Korath moved, Jake could hear his joints creaking like stone grinding against stone. "So this is the human," Korath said. His voice was deep and slow, like distant thunder. "I have heard about your people. You break easily." The second trainee was called Mind Ripper. She was one of the Cerebrax aliens with the big heads and glowing eyes. She was smaller than Korath, but still taller than Jake. Her skin was pale blue and seemed to glow from within. When she looked at Jake, he felt a strange pressure in his head, like someone was trying to push into his thoughts. "His mind is so simple," Mind Ripper said without moving her lips. Her voice appeared directly in Jake's head. "Like a child's toy. This will be boring." The third trainee was the most dangerous looking of all. His name was Flamebringer, and he was one of the Stellar Chosen. He looked like a human-shaped creature made of living fire and lightning. Energy sparked around his hands and feet, and his eyes glowed like small suns. When he spoke, his voice crackled like electricity. "I could turn him to ash without trying," Flamebringer said. Small bolts of energy shot from his fingers as he talked. "Why are we wasting time with this weak creature?" Zextar clicked his claws, together making a sound like metal tapping on glass. "The council wants us to train the human, so we will train him. But first, let me show you what real training looks like." The commander led them to another room. This one was even bigger, with a ceiling so high that Jake could barely see it. The floor was covered with sand, and there were obstacles everywhere. Some looked like walls to climb over, others like pits to jump across. There were also machines that Jake didn't recognize, but they all looked dangerous. "This is the pain chamber," Zextar explained. "Every day you will come here. Every day you will suffer. Most creatures quit after the first week. Some die after the second week. The few who survive the full training become the elite warriors of the galaxy." Zextar turned to look at Jake with all his many eyes. But you, human, will not survive even the first day. Your bones are too soft, your muscles too weak, your mind too slow. Watch and learn how real warriors train." The commander pressed a button on the wall. Suddenly, the room came alive with danger. Metal spikes shot up from the floor. Energy beams fired from the walls. The air filled with the sound of weapons and machinery. Korath immediately jumped into action. He ran through the obstacles like they were not even there. When spikes tried to stab him, they broke against his stone skin. When energy beams hit him, they bounced off harmlessly. His forearms moved like a blur, punching through metal walls and crushing machines. Mind Ripper moved differently. She closed her eyes and seemed to know where every attack was coming from before it happened. She danced between the energy beams and stepped over the spikes like she was walking through a peaceful garden. Her mental powers let her see the future and avoid every danger. Flamebringer was the most spectacular to watch. He flew through the air on wings made of pure energy. When obstacles got in his way, he simply destroyed them with bolts of lightning. He moved like a living storm, beautiful and terrifying at the same time. "Now you try, human," Zextar said with obvious amusement in his voice. Jake looked at the obstacle course. Everything in it was designed to hurt or kill him. The spikes were sharp enough to cut through steel. The energy beams were hot enough to melt rock. The machines moved faster than his eyes could follow. But Jake had not come this far to quit now. He took a deep breath and stepped into the chamber. The first spike nearly got him. It shot up from the floor right where his foot was about to land. Jake threw himself to the side, rolling in the sand. An energy beam fired where his head had been a second before. The aliens watched with interest as Jake struggled through the course. He was not as strong as Korath, so he could not break through the obstacles. He was not as smart as Mind Ripper, so he could not predict where the attacks would come from. He was not as powerful as Flamebringer, so he could not destroy the machines. But Jake had something the aliens did not expect. He had the ability to learn and adapt faster than they thought possible. When a spike tried to stab him, he learned to listen for the sound it made before it moved. When an energy beam fired at him, he learned to watch for the small light that appeared before it shot. By the end of the first day, Jake was covered in cuts and burns. His uniform was torn and dirty. He could barely stand up straight. But he was still alive, and he had made it through the entire course. "Interesting," Zextar said quietly. "Perhaps this will not be as boring as I thought." The other trainees looked at Jake with new eyes. They had expected him to die, or quit on the first day. Instead, he had survived something that killed most creatures in the galaxy. Jake limped back to his sleeping quarters that night. His whole body hurt, and he knew tomorrow would be even harder. But for the first time since arriving on Nexus Prime, he smiled. The aliens thought they knew what humans were capable of. They were about to learn they were very wrong. 6 months had passed since Jake first entered the training facility. The human who walked into the pain chamber now was very different from the one who had arrived on Nexus Prime. His body had changed in ways that surprised even the alien doctors, who studied him. Jake's muscles were now much bigger and harder than before. His reflexes had become so fast that he could catch flying objects that most aliens could not even see. His bones had grown denser and stronger from all the punishment they had taken. Most importantly, his mind had changed. He thought differently, now like a predator instead of prey. Dr. Helen Martinez was the human scientist who had been watching Jake's progress from Earth. She sat in her lab, staring at the data on her computer screen with amazement. The numbers seemed impossible, but they were real. "Admiral Collins, you need to see this," Helen said into her communication device. Admiral Betty Collins appeared on the screen from her office on Earth. She looked tired but interested. "What have you found, Helen?" "Jake's physical abilities have increased by 40% across the board," Helen explained. "His muscle density is now equal to that of a Krillian warrior. His reaction time is faster than a Cerebrax thinker. His endurance levels match those of a stellar chosen." Betty leaned forward in her chair. "That's impossible. Humans don't change that much." "That's what I thought too," Helen said. "But the constant pressure, the alien training methods, the need to survive. It's pushed Jake beyond normal human limits. His body has adapted in ways we never thought possible. Back on Nexus Prime, Jake was in the middle of his daily combat training. He faced Korath in hand-to-hand combat, something that would have been suicide 6 months ago. Now Jake moved around the massive alien like water flowing around a rock. Korath swung one of his forearms at Jake's head. The blow was powerful enough to crush steel, but Jake was no longer there. He had rolled under the attack, and was now behind Korath, striking at the joints between the alien's stone-like armor plates. Impossible, Korath growled as he spun around. You are too fast now, human. This is not natural. Jake didn't reply. He had learned that talking during combat was a waste of energy. Instead, he focused on the fight. He had studied Korath for months, learning every weakness in the alien's seemingly impenetrable defense. When Korath charged at him with all forearms swinging, Jake did something unexpected. He grabbed a handful of sand from the floor and threw it at Korath's eyes. While the alien was temporarily blinded, Jake jumped onto his back and found the one spot where Korath's armor was weakest. The Krillian warrior crashed to the ground. Defeated by a human who had learned to fight dirty when fighting fair was not enough. Victory to the human, announced Zextar, who had been watching the fight with growing concern. Next came Jake's match with Mind Ripper. The Cerebrax had been trying to break into Jake's mind for months, but the human had developed mental defenses that confused her telepathic abilities. Mind Ripper closed her glowing eyes and focused her power on Jake. She tried to overwhelm his thoughts with fear and pain, but Jake's mind was no longer the simple thing she had expected. He had learned to compartmentalize his thoughts, to hide his real plans behind layers of mental barriers. Your mind is like a maze now, Mind Ripper said, frustration clear in her telepathic voice. How is this possible? Jake smiled but did not answer. While Mind Ripper was distracted trying to read his thoughts, he moved quickly across the training room. He had learned that telepaths became vulnerable when they focused too hard on mental attacks. Before Mind Ripper could react, Jake was behind her. He placed his hand gently on her shoulder, not to hurt her but to show that he could have hurt her if he wanted to. Victory to the human, Zextar announced again, his voice now carrying a note of worry. The final test was against Flamebringer. The Stellar Chosen had been the most confident about defeating Jake, but that confidence was fading fast. Jake had learned to predict the energy-wielding alien's attack patterns. Flamebringer raised his hands and shot bolts of lightning at Jake. The human moved like a ghost, dodging between the energy beams. He had learned to read the small signs that appeared before Flamebringer attacked, the way his eyes focused, the way his body tensed, the way energy gathered around his hands. Stand still and fight like a warrior, Flamebringer shouted in frustration. I am fighting like a human, Jake replied calmly. Jake had noticed something about the training room that the aliens had missed. There were metal pipes running along the walls, part of the facility's power system. Jake grabbed one of these pipes and ripped it from the wall using his enhanced strength. When Flamebringer fired his next energy attack, Jake held up the metal pipe. The lightning bolt struck the pipe and traveled through it, but Jake had grounded the other end to the floor. The energy harmlessly flowed into the ground instead of hitting him. Before Flamebringer could fire again, Jake threw the pipe like a spear. It struck the alien in the chest, not hard enough to seriously hurt him, but hard enough to knock him down. Victory to the human, Zextar said quietly. After the training session, Zextar called Jake aside. The alien commander looked different now, less confident and more worried. What are you becoming, human? Zextar asked. Jake thought about the question. 6 months ago he had been a normal human soldier. Now he was something else entirely. He had learned to fight like a Krillian, think like a Cerebrax, and move like a Stellar Chosen, but he had also kept the things that made him human. His creativity, his adaptability, his refusal to give up. I'm becoming what you made me, Jake answered. You wanted to see how far a human could be pushed. You wanted to prove that we were weak, but you forgot something important about my species. What did we forget? Zextar asked. We don't just adapt to challenges, Jake said. We become better than them. Word of Jake's success was spreading throughout the galaxy. Aliens who had laughed at humans 6 months ago were now asking questions. How had one human defeated 3 of their best warriors? What did this mean for the rest of humanity? Admiral Collins received a message from the Galactic Defense Council. They were no longer asking for 1 human trainee. They wanted 100 humans, and they wanted them as soon as possible. But Jake was not finished with his transformation. There was still one final test to complete, the Nexus Challenge. Only 12 beings in galactic history had ever completed it successfully. Jake would be the 13th to try. As he prepared for the ultimate test, Jake looked at himself in the mirror. The person staring back at him was barely recognizable as the human who had first arrived on Nexus Prime. He had become something new, something dangerous, something that the galaxy had never seen before. The aliens had wanted to break him. Instead, they had forged him into the deadliest weapon in the universe, a human who had learned to fight like them but had never forgotten how to think like himself. The day of the Nexus Challenge had arrived. Jake stood at the entrance of the most dangerous training facility in the galaxy. The Nexus defense grid was a massive maze filled with deadly traps, robot enemies, and challenges that had killed hundreds of warriors over the years. Only 12 beings in all of galactic history had ever completed the Nexus Challenge successfully. Most who tried did not come out alive. Those who did survive but failed were usually broken in body and spirit, never to fight again. Thousands of aliens had come to watch Jake attempt the impossible. They filled the observation galleries around the maze, their eyes fixed on the small human who dared to challenge what their greatest warriors had failed to complete. Commander Zextar stood next to Jake at the entrance. The alien's compound eyes reflected a mixture of respect and fear. Over the past months, he had watched Jake transform from a weak human into something that defied explanation. "Are you ready, human?" Zextar asked. Jake nodded. He wore simple combat gear and carried basic weapons, a knife, a pistol, and some rope. Compared to the advanced technology most aliens used, his equipment looked primitive. But Jake had learned that sometimes the simplest tools were the most effective. "Remember," Zextar continued, "once you enter the maze, you are alone. No one can help you. No one can save you if you fail. The maze will try to kill you in every way possible." Jake looked at the entrance to the maze. It was a dark opening in a wall of black metal, like the mouth of some giant monster waiting to swallow him. Strange symbols glowed around the entrance, and Jake could hear mechanical sounds coming from deep inside. "I understand," Jake said simply. As Jake stepped into the maze, the entrance sealed behind him with a loud clang. He was now alone in the most dangerous place in the galaxy, with only his wits and training to keep him alive. The first chamber was filled with laser beams that moved in complex patterns. Most warriors tried to time their movements to avoid the beams, but Jake had a different idea. He studied the room carefully and noticed that the lasers were powered by energy cables running along the walls. Instead of dodging the beams, Jake used his knife to cut the power cables. The lasers flickered and died, allowing him to walk safely through the room. In the observation gallery, aliens murmured in surprise. None of them had ever thought to disable the traps instead of avoiding them. The second chamber contained robot warriors programmed with the fighting skills of the galaxy's greatest champions. These metal soldiers were faster and stronger than most living beings, and their weapons could cut through steel. Jake faced 3 robot warriors at once. They attacked him with perfect coordination, their movements precisely calculated to give him no escape. But Jake had learned something important during his training. Robots were predictable, even very advanced ones. He threw sand in the sensors of the first robot, blinding it temporarily. While it was confused, Jake grabbed its weapon and used it to destroy the second robot. The third robot tried to attack him from behind, but Jake had anticipated this move. He rolled to the side and used the environment to his advantage, causing the robot to crash into a wall. "Impossible," whispered an alien in the observation gallery. "He fights like he knows what they will do before they do it." The third chamber was a maze within the maze, filled with poisonous gas and deadly creatures. Most warriors who reached this point tried to fight their way through, but Jake remembered his human creativity. He used his rope to swing above the gas, avoiding the toxic fumes. When monsters attacked him, he used the maze's own traps against them, leading them into dead ends where they became trapped or killed by the facility's security systems. The fourth chamber tested mental strength. It created illusions designed to drive warriors insane with fear. Jake saw visions of his worst nightmares, his friends dying, Earth being destroyed, himself failing and bringing shame to humanity. But Jake's mind had been hardened by months of alien training. He had learned to compartmentalize his thoughts, to separate reality from illusion. He walked through the chamber of horrors with his eyes closed, using his other senses to navigate while ignoring the false visions. The fifth chamber was the most dangerous of all. It contained a holographic enemy that adapted to whoever was fighting it. The hologram studied Jake's movements and began to copy his fighting style, becoming stronger and faster with each passing moment. Most warriors who reached this point were defeated by fighting an enemy that knew all their moves. But Jake had one advantage the hologram could not copy: his ability to think in ways no alien had ever imagined. Jake began to fight in a completely random pattern, using moves that made no sense, attacking in ways that were inefficient and seemingly stupid. The hologram tried to adapt, but Jake's chaotic fighting style was impossible to predict or counter. While the hologram was confused by Jake's random attacks, Jake used the confusion to study his enemy's weaknesses. He noticed that the hologram had a small delay when switching between different fighting styles. In that tiny moment of vulnerability, Jake struck with precision, destroying the hologram with a single blow. The final chamber was the most challenging test of all. Jake faced a holographic version of Vorthak, the snake-like alien who had first mocked him at the council meeting. This version was enhanced with the fighting skills of every warrior who had ever lived, making it nearly invincible. The battle lasted for hours. Jake was cut, burned, and beaten, but he refused to give up. He used every skill he had learned, every technique he had mastered, every advantage he could find. He fought like a Krillian when he needed strength, thought like a Cerebrax when he needed strategy, and moved like a Stellar Chosen when he needed speed. But most importantly, he fought like a human when he needed to survive. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Jake stood victorious over the defeated hologram. He was covered in blood and barely able to stand, but he had done what only 12 beings before him had accomplished. As Jake emerged from the maze, the thousands of watching aliens fell silent. They had witnessed something they had never seen before, a human who had not just survived the Nexus challenge, but had conquered it using methods none of them had ever imagined. Commander Zextar approached Jake with something that might have been awe in his compound eyes. "What have we created?" he whispered. Jake looked up at the galleries filled with aliens who were no longer laughing. His voice was quiet, but carried a strength that made even the bravest warriors step back. "You wanted to see what would happen if you pushed a human to his limits," Jake said. "You wanted to prove that we were weak and worthless, but you made a mistake." "What mistake?" Zextar asked. "You forgot that humans are not just survivors," Jake replied. "We are conquerors. We don't just adapt to challenges, we master them. We don't just learn from our enemies, we become better than them." News of Jake's success spread across the galaxy like wildfire. Within days, the Galactic Defense Council sent an urgent message to Earth. They no longer wanted just one human trainee. They wanted 1,000 humans, and they wanted them immediately. But it was too late to control what they had created. Jake, Morrison had become proof that humans were not the galaxy's weakest species, but potentially its most dangerous. The aliens had laughed at humanity's weakness, but their laughter had awakened something they could not understand or control. The monster they had created through mockery and brutal training would soon have company, and the galaxy would never be the same again.